one of the most challenging things for young adults is that they're not usually considered old enough to make certain decisions, even though you're signing for your own chemotherapy. But at the age of 18, I was still considered pediatric, and they're not like, well, she definitely should be thinking about a family someday. Plus, when I was initially diagnosed, I was diagnosed and started chemo like 12 hours later. There wasn't a lot of time if I had wanted to harvest any eggs or anything for future family planning. And that is definitely, I think, a huge gap that does happen in young adults. It kind of gets overlooked, especially with teens.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Hashtags All About AYA Cancer. I'm Steve.
And I'm Lauren, sitting in for Sabrina.
And we'll be with you for our 4-part series on family planning challenges for AYA survivors.
I sat with one of our young adult survivors, Paige, to talk about how she and her husband Will faced the challenge of infertility and family planning.
In the opening clip, Paige sets up this difficult issue which affects so many other AYAs and their partners.
In the first 3 parts of this series, we'll hear Paige talking about their efforts at in vitro fertilization and adoption. And in part 4, Paige will join us here in the studio to talk about her best advice for other couples like her and Will.
Let's listen to how it all started.
So Paige, this podcast is all about family planning and cancer survivors. So just tell us a little bit about how and when family planning became an issue for you.
So I knew after I'd completed treatment that family planning was always going to be an issue for me. I was 18 when I finished. It wasn't really something that was on the forefront of my mind. I kind of, probably with a lot of other things, kept it buried at the back of my mind. I remember going to see a specialist after I finished treatment about certain medications I had to be on just to maintain hormone levels and things like that. And then after I met my now husband, it was something that I definitely wanted the person that I was dating as in a serious relationship to be aware of. So it was something that we talked about pretty early on in our relationship, and shortly after we got married, we talked again about what our plans were going to be as far as starting a family. We both knew that we wanted to have a family. My husband's one of 4 kids, I'm one of 3, and I'd always planned on being a mom. So we contacted a facility that specializes in fertility treatments. Our initial family plan, I guess that's terrible, was to attempt some sort of fertility treatment so we could see if I could get pregnant and so that my husband would be able to father the child. So after that, it kind of shot off from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just going back to something you said in the beginning, you saw a specialist after treatment was over.
Correct.
Did anyone talk to you about fertility prior to treatment or during?
No one talked to me specifically. I did have a conversation with my mom, and she remembers like a very brief conversation with one of my oncologists about it, but it was very much passed over, and when I needed to start treatment, it was pretty emergent at that point in time. I was diagnosed, and literally like 12 hours later, I started treatment, so it was very fast.
Yeah, timing is important sometimes.
Yeah.
So when you and Will decided that you wanted to start a family, you had some decisions to make. And there's a couple different paths to having a child if you can't conceive a child naturally. So you were sort of at a decision point to go IVF or to go the adoption route. Mm-hmm. Tell us what factors entered into the decision you finally made.
Like I said, initially when we first started talking about family planning, we very much wanted to try fertility treatments first to see if, I would be able to get pregnant, and we wanted, Will, even though the child wouldn't biologically be mine, I would still be able to carry the child, and it would biologically be Will's child. So that was a hard process, and it did take a lot of decision making, and it's also very expensive. We both had a conversation before we even started our fertility treatments that if it didn't work and wasn't successful, we very much felt like that was a door that was closing on that option, and that we were going to look into other options, which is how we got to deciding to adopt. And that's where we are today.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about where you are now with adoption in a minute. But when you made the decision to go the IVF route, did other people weigh in on your decisions? And if so, what was that like for you?
I think everyone has opinion about everything, and that's okay. It didn't really weigh on me as far as what our choices were. You know, a lot of people are like, well, it's so expensive. Why don't you try this? Or why don't you adopt an embryo because it's so expensive? And either way, it was going to cost money. And we felt that odds-wise, we were going to be giving ourselves the greatest chance if we went a pure in vitro route with a donor egg and really just followed what the doctors had initially told us would be a good plan for us. So,
did anybody try to dissuade you from that route?
I don't think anyone tried to specifically dissuade us. It was more just asking if, since it cost such a great amount of money, if it was really worth it. And I think a lot of people were just more worried about us if it was unsuccessful. So in that way, they were probably trying to dissuade us from doing it.
I think that's interesting when you said some people asked you to consider, was it worth it? What was having a child worth to you?
I don't really think there's words. Honestly, I can't put it into words. Like I said, I always planned to be a mom, and I feel in my heart that I already am a mom. I'm just a mom without a baby right now, or a mom without a child. And honestly, I can't put into words what it would be worth, but it's worth everything in the world.
You know, Lauren, before I came to 1330 Cancer Connect, I never would have thought of this issue. You know, listening to Paige, hearing her story, to me, it's just been truly eye-opening.
Yeah, it is for many, Steve, and that's exactly the goal of hashtags. So in part 2, we'll learn more about the physical and the emotional impact of infertility on AYA survivors.